There is a man burning in the middle of a church, and he is not running. Sunlight pours down through the broken glass gold, gentle, the kind of light this city has never learned to fear. But he fears it. His skin blisters, his hair catches. He kneels on the cold stone's floor, both palms pressed flat against it, and turns his face up into the very thing that is killing him. 400 years. He has waited 400 years for this. Behind him a woman screams, a name, not his. A door splinters. A flock of birds beats up into the dark of the vault, and through all of it an old book lies open on a stone stand, its lines of text burning blue, one by one. No one ever taught her how to forgive. No one ever taught her anything at all. She takes a breath, and she steps toward the light. The rain in Boston that November was not the kind that fell. It was the kind that waited. It hung in the air between the brick buildings on Newbury Street. Patient as a creditor, and it soaked into a person's coat one thread at a time until she realized she had been cold for hours and had simply forgotten to notice. Delia Marsh had forgotten a lot of things about her own body. She was 24 years old. She weighed 220 pounds, and she had spent every one of those 24 years learning how to apologize for both facts without ever saying a word out loud. You could watch her do it if you knew where to look. Watch her on the Green Line at 7:40 in the morning. Watch her choose the seat by the door, not because it was convenient, because it meant only one stranger could sit beside her instead of two. Watch her fold her arms across her stomach the second she sits down, not to get comfortable. To make a wall, watch her turn her knees toward the window so her thighs take up less of the bench. Watch her keep her bag on her lap, always on her lap, because a bag on the lap is a shield. A shield is the closest thing to armor a woman like Delia had ever been allowed to carry. Nobody teaches you this. Nobody sits you down at 12 years old and says, "Here is how you make yourself into a smaller shape. Here is how you become furniture. Here is how you exist in a room without leaving fingerprints on it." You just learn. You learn it from your aunt at Thanksgiving, who reaches across the table and touches your wrist and says, "Sweetheart, have you tried intermittent fasting?" And she says it kindly. That is the worst part of it. She says it the way you would tell someone their shoelace is untied, because she thinks she is helping. Because in her mind she is being generous, offering you the map out of the country you were born in. You learn it from the girl in the Usega pants who looks at you on the train and then looks away, quick, the way you look away from an accident. You learn it from the woman at the department store who asks if you're shopping for a gift. Because obviously nothing here would fit you. Obviously you learn it from 1,000 small cuts, none of which draw enough blood to complain about, all of which add up to a person who walks fast, hunches forward, and has never once in her adult life stood in front of a full-length mirror without immediately looking away. That was Delia Marsh. That was who she was on the morning this story begins. Except there was one thing about her that nobody knew. Not her boss. Not the girl at the front counter. Not her mother, who had passed 4 years ago and taken most of the answers with her. Delia Marsh was looking for something, and she had been looking for a very long time. The shop was called Halloway and Sons, though there had not been a son in 60 years, and the sign had never been repainted. It sat at the quiet end of Newbury, past where the tourists turned around, wedged between a shuttered gallery and a place that sold candles nobody bought. Inside, it smelled like old glue and leather, like paper that had been holding its breath since the Coolidge administration. Delia loved it the way you love a place that never asks you anything. Her domain was the back room, restoration, a long steel table under a swan neck lamp, and on that table whatever the shop had dragged in from the estate sales of dead men. Waterlogged hymnals, ledgers from shipping firms that went under before the Civil War, family Bibles with names written in the front in fading brown ink, generations of them, and then a blank line where somebody had stopped writing because there was nobody left to write. She was good at this. Not adequate. Good. Her hands were steady. Her patience was bottomless. And she could look at a spine that had been broken for 140 years and see, underneath the ruin, the exact shape it had been on the day it was sewn. Old Halloway himself had told her once, in the closest thing to affection he was capable of, that she had a gift for reading damage. He meant it about books. She had gone home that night and sat in her car in the parking lot behind her apartment for 11 minutes without turning off the engine. Here is the thing nobody knew. Delia's mother had been adopted, 1961. An orphanage in Lancashire, in the north of England, a stone building with a slate roof that had since been converted into art for people who wanted a view of the moors. That was it. That was the whole inheritance. A country and a year. Her mother had never wanted to look. Some people don't. Some people decide that the door is closed, and the closed door is a kind of peace, and Delia had never begrudged her that. But her mother was gone now, and the door was still there. So for 3 years Delia had been writing letters, filing requests, learning slowly how the archives of the United Kingdom actually work, which is to say slowly and rudely, and with an administrative contempt for anyone who cannot visit in person. She had a shoebox under her bed. Photocopies, denials, one partial ledger entry from a parish register, scanned so badly she had spent a week enhancing it on a library computer, and at the end of that week she had a single word, Sowerby, a surname. Maybe, possibly a place, possibly nothing. And one other thing, in the corner of transfer document, the kind of paper that moves a child from one institution to another, stamped and signed by people who never once looked her mother. In the face there was a line for the party covering costs, and in that line, typed on a machine with a worn letter A, was the name of a holding company, Ashgrove. Delia had searched that name for 2 years. She had found nothing. No filings, no address, no history. A company that owned property and paid for orphans and left no other mark on the world. It should have been a dead end. It should have been. The first man came into the shop at 11 in the morning, in daylight, which mattered later, though nobody knew it yet. Delia was at the front counter because it was Tuesday, and on Tuesdays she covered the register while the other girl took her class at Emerson. He was old, not ancient. 60, maybe, though something about him made the number feel like a costume. Silver hair, combed back with the kind of discipline you only see in men who were raised to be looked at. A navy suit that had never in its life met a rack. And he was polite. That is what she remembered afterward. Not the eyes. Not yet. The politeness. He came in out of the rain, and he did not shake his umbrella onto the floor. He set it in the stand by the door, tipped down. He said, "Good morning." He asked whether the shop had anything on the ecclesiastical courts of the 17th century. Delia said they might. She'd have to look. He said, "Please don't trouble yourself." And then he browsed, slowly, the way a man browses when he has nowhere else to be and no interest at all in the merchandise. She rang him up for a cheap edition of a book on the Assizes. $11. He paid in cash. No change. Which she noticed the way you notice a thing without understanding you have noticed it. And as she slid the book across the counter, he stopped. He was looking at her hands, not her face, not her body. Nobody ever looked at her hands. "Forgive me," he said. "It's fine. You have the hands of someone I used to know," Delia laughed. "Because what else do you do? That's okay." "Sure. She died in 1612, and he smiled at her, a warm smile. A grandfather's smile. The kind of smile that makes you feel you have been let in on a joke. And the joke is gentle, and it is not about you. Then he picked up his $11 book, and he collected his umbrella, and he walked out into the rain. The bell over the door made its small stopped noise, and Delia Marsh stood behind the counter for a full 90 kes without moving. She thought, that was strange, she thought. Old men say strange things. She thought about it again on the train home, and then she stopped thinking about it the way you stop thinking about a sound in the wall. She would remember it. In the dark, with her heart going like a bird in a box. She would remember every single word. 3 days, and then the second man came. It was raining harder by then. Freezing rain, the kind that comes off the harbor sideways and finds the gap between your collar and your neck, like it has been looking for it all your life. Delia was at the counter again. Kendra was in the office. Kendra was 22, and beautiful in the effortless, unbothered way of someone who has never once considered whether a chair will hold her. Delia was restocking mylar sleeves, counting them. 240. The bell rang, and the air changed. She would try to explain this later and fail. It was not that the temperature dropped, though it did. It was that the room stopped being a room and became a space with something in it. He filled the doorway 6'4" at least, a charcoal overcoat that had cost more than Delia's car, black hair, a jaw you could have used to break ice, and the eyes amber, not brown. Amber, the actual color, the color of resin without something dead inside it. And when they moved across the shop, they moved like a searchlight. Kendra was out of the office in 3 seconds flat, smoothing her skirt. Smiling, "Welcome to Holloway's. Can I help you, sir?" He did not look at her. He looked at Delia, and Delia felt her arms come up across her stomach. Automatic reflex. The way you flinch from a hand. Don't, she thought. Don't look at me. Look at her. Everybody looks at her. I am looking for a text, the man said. His voice was low, not loud. It did not need to be loud. It was the voice of a man who has never in 400 years had to repeat himself. The Codex of St. Cyprian. I am told it came in through an estate sale. Kendra blinked. Her smile went brittle at the edges, the way a smile does when it has been ignored so completely that it becomes evidence of a crime. Oh, Delia's the archivist. She handles acquisitions. He came toward the counter, slow, unhurried. And with every step, Delia's skin got tighter, and by the time he stopped on the other side of the glass, she could smell him. Cold air, bergamot. Cedar, fought old cedar, the inside of a chest that has been closed for a long time. Delia, he said. He said it like he was tasting it. I'm Corvin Ashgrove, and the floor went out from under her, not visibly. Nothing visible happened at all. Her face did not move. Her hands kept their grip on the stack of sleeves. But somewhere behind her ribs, a 2-year-old dead end stood up and started walking. Ashgrove. The name on the paper, the name in the box under her bed. The name that had paid for a little girl in Lancashire in 1961 and then vanished off the face of the earth. I can. Her voice came out wrong. Small. She hated it. I can check the log. She turned around because she had to. Because if she stayed facing him for one more second, he was going to see it on her. And she did not know what he was, but she knew that whatever it was, you did not let it see you first. Her fingers shook on the keyboard. 2 years. 2 years of letters and stamps and library computers and polite refusals from men in Manchester who had better things to do. And he walked in the door. He walked in the door. She could feel him watching her back. Not the way men watched her. She knew that look. She had a doctorate in that look, the quick appraisal and the quicker dismissal, the eyes that slid off her like water off a windshield. This was not that. This was heavier. This was a man reading a page. She turned around with her tablet across her chest like a breastplate, and she said, Have it. Good. It's in the vault. The binding took water damage. It won't be viewable until Friday. He tilted his head. His eyes went down, just for a moment. Down across the bulk of her sweatshirt, the shapeless gray fortress she had built that morning. Then back up, and he breathed in, slowly, deliberately. His nostrils moved. She felt the hair rise on her arms. Friday, he said. No, sir, $50,000 tonight. As it is, Kendra made a noise in the back of the shop like she'd been hit. Delia's mouth opened. $50,000 for a waterlogged 16th century occult text with a cracked spine. Halloway had bought the entire lot for $3,000 and considered himself robbed. I'd have to call Mr. Halloway. Do so. He reached inside his coat. The card he set on the glass was matte black, heavy. Nothing on it but an address and a phone number in silver. His fingers brushed her knuckles. She jerked her hand back, cold, not cold like a man who has been outside. Cold like the handrail of a bridge in February. He did not apologize. He watched the blood come up into her cheeks. He watched it the way a man watches weather. When you have the book, Delia. You will bring it to that address, personally. 9 o'clock, we have couriers, you. And the word landed on her like a hand on the back of her neck. Only you. He turned to go. At the door he paused, and without looking back he said, Wear something warm. The wind off the river tonight is unkind, the bell rang. And he was gone into the rain, and the rain closed behind him like it had been waiting. Kendra was talking. Something about $50,000. Something about how she'd never seen a coat like that outside of a movie. Delia did not hear a word of it. She was holding the black card in both hands. She was looking at the address. And under the address, embossed so faintly you would miss it, unless the light caught it just right, was a small mark, an ash tree, a tree in a grove. And Delia Marsh felt something she had not felt since she was a child. Not fear. She would examine this later, and it would frighten her more than the man had. It was appetite. Halloway nearly died on the phone, 50,000. He made her repeat it twice. He asked if the man was drunk. He asked if the man was a policeman. And then he told her to pack the codex in the archival case, the good one, and take a car service. And if the sale went through, she should have a bonus vest large enough that she would not have to think about her car payment until spring. Delia said, Yes, sir. She hung up, and she stood in the back room with her hand flat on the steel table for a long minute. Here is what she should have done. She should have said no. She should have said, Mr. Halloway, I am not a courier, And I do not go to strange men's houses at 9 at night. And I have a bad feeling about this that I cannot explain and would sound insane if I tried. She should have gone home and fed her cat and locked the door. Except the name, except 2 years of nothing, and then a name on a business card, and a man who knew her name before she gave it. Because here is a thing that people who have always known where they come from do not understand. When you don't know, it is not curiosity. Curiosity is a hobby. This was not a hobby. This was a hole in the floor of her, right at the center, and she had built her entire careful shrinking life around the edges of it. And she had told herself for 24 years that she did not need to look down. But she had never once stopped feeling the draft. She packed the book, she wore the biggest coat she owned, black, puffed, down to her calves. The kind of coat that made her a shape rather than a woman. She chose it on purpose. She knew she was choosing it on purpose. She did it anyway. And in the inside pocket, folded into a square, she put a photocopy of a transfer document from an orphanage in Lancashire, Beacon Hill, at 9 at night in November. The cobblestones were slick and black, gas lamps, real ones, hissing in the wet, not a soul on the street. The kind of quiet that money buys and then guards. The house was brick. Ivy to the 4th floor. An iron gate. She reached for the intercom. The gate is open, Delia. She had not pressed the button. Her hand stopped an inch from the brass. Her heart went sideways in her chest. The gate swung the door open before she knocked. He was in a black shirt, 2 buttons undone. No coat. And the house behind him was gold. Firelight on Persian rugs. A staircase that curved up into a dark she could not see the top of. "You're freezing?" he said. Did not step aside. He stood there and he looked at her. Standing on his threshold, soaked, enormous in the coat. A woman built like an apology, holding a $50,000 book against her chest like it might protect her. "I have the book. Come in." The door shut behind her, and the sound stopped. That was what she noticed. Not the door closing, the silence after. Boston has no silence, not ever. There is always a siren somewhere, or a bus downshifting, or a dog. And in that foyer there was nothing, no rain on the glass, no wind, nothing at all. Like the house had been built to hold sound in, or keep it out. "Take off your coat. I'll just leave the book." Mr. Ashcroft, Corvin. And I said, "Take off your coat. You are shivering. I will not have you sick in my house." And then he was in front of her. She did not see him cross the distance. That is not a figure of speech. She was looking at him from 8 feet away, and then he was close enough that she could see there was no reflection of the fire in his eyes. Only in front of them. Like the light was landing on glass. His hands were at her collar. "Freezing, I can do it." She stepped back so fast she hit the wall. She shrugged out of the coat herself. Wet nylon. It came off her like a shed skin, and underneath she was in a men's flannel, red and black, 3 sizes too big, and sweatpants, and she had never in her life felt so completely without a door to close. Her arms crossed over her stomach, reflex. Shield. Same as the bus. Same as the table at Thanksgiving. Same as always. He hung the coat on a brass hook. And when he turned back, his eyes went down her slowly. Not the flick. Not the appraisal and epistle she had eaten every day of her adult life. This was slow. She could feel him tracing the drape of the flannel and finding the shape underneath, the heavy curve of her hip, the weight of her, the whole unforgivable geography of her, and he did not look away. "Why do you hide?" The question hit her lower than the cold hate had. "I'm not, it's cold out. You wear clothing made for men twice your size." He took a step. "You fold shoulders forward to make yourself narrow. You cross your arms to cover your stomach. You walk quickly so that you are not looked at for long." Another step. "Why?" And her eyes were burning, and it was not fair. It was not fair that a stranger could take a thing she had built for decades and name every brick of it in 8 seconds, standing in his foyer, in his warm gold house, with his cold hands. "That's none of your business," she said. She said it to the floor. She said it to her own sneakers, which were falling apart. Knuckles brushed her cheek. "Ice, your heart is at 130 beats per minute." She could not move. "You smell of paper and rain." And fear, he leaned in, his mouth near her ear, not touching, and the cold came off him like the door of a walk-in freezer, and underneath the fear. "Sugar and cream, run," said something in the back of her skull. "Run right now, out the door, down the hill. Don't stop." And her body did not move an inch, because there was a photocopy in her coat pocket, hanging on a brass hook 8 feet behind her, and because she had come here for a reason. and because if she ran now, she would spend the rest of her life in the back room of a bookshop. Safe, small, folded, wondering. So Delia Marsh lifted her head, and she looked a predator in the face and she asked him a question. Why is your company's name on my mother's adoptional agent papers? The house went very still. He stopped. She watched something move behind his eyes. Something old. Something that had been waiting so long it had almost forgotten what it was waiting for. Ah, Corvin Ashgrove said softly, almost tenderly, there she is. He took her into the study. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany, 3 stories of it, with a ladder on a brass rail. 10,000 books. She could smell that some of them were older than the country. He told her to put the case on the desk. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to use both to work the buckles. She talked because that was what she did when the ground moved. The spine's unstable. You shouldn't open it fully until the glue cures. And even then, I'd recommend a cradle. Honestly, the boards are. She pulled it out. The codex, sealed in mylar, 16th century. Cracked leather the color of old blood, they say it's a grimoire. Late 1500s. Blood rights, eternal life, that sort of thing. Folklore, obviously, but as a physical object it is not folklore. She looked up. He was leaning against the desk with his arms crossed. He had not looked at the book once. He was looking at her. Answer my question, she said. Which one? The papers. 1961. Ashgrove Holdings paid for my mother's transfer out of that orphanage. Why? Because someone had to. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't, and she was going to push. She had her mouth open. She had 2 years of stamped envelopes behind her teeth, which is when the front door came off its hinges. The sound was enormous. Wood splintering. Iron groaning. Somewhere in the foyer, something heavy and expensive hit the floor and shattered. Delia screamed. Corvin did not move. Not one muscle except his eyes. The amber went out like a light and something red came up underneath it. Not glowing, not a special effect. Just red, the way an animal's eyes are red at the edge of a highway at night. And the aristocrat was simply gone, and what stood there in his place was 400 years of something that had never once been prey. Behind me his voice had a second voice under it. Footsteps in the hall. Heavy, wet. And a man came into the doorway. Soaked, leathered jacket, pale, but not like Corvin, not marble. This was the pale of a thing pulled out of a drain. His eyes were black, whole, no white. And under the skin beneath them, dark veins spread like ink in water. Ashgrove, he said, and he grinned. Word is you found the codex. The syndicate wants its holes. Pike? Corvin's voice was almost bored. You have tracked mud onto a rug that is older than your country. And you have interrupted a private conversation. Yeah? I don't care about your rug. Alden Pike laughed, and his mouth opened too wide, and the teeth were wrong. Wrong in a way that made Delia's mind simply stop trying. And then those black eyes swung and found her behind the desk, and they lit up. Oh, Pike said. And a snack. He looked her up and down. Big one, too. All that sweet fat to sink into, and it stung. That is the obscene part. That is what she would think about at 4 a.m. for the rest of her life. There was a monster in the room. There were teeth. There was a broken door and a house full of dead air, and a man with no whites in his eyes. And what she felt first, before the terror for a quarter of a second, in the oldest and most beaten-down room of her heart was shame. Because even now, even here, somebody was talking about her body. Then Pike moved. He did not go for Corvin. He went for her straight across the room, faster than a thought, and his hands closed on her shoulders and hauled her forward across the desk. The flannel shirt tore open. Buttons went everywhere, skittering across the hardwood like teeth. The thin white tank underneath caught on his claws and split down the middle, and she was open. Her stomach, her waist, the heavy soft weight of her chest in a plain cotton bra. All of it in the cold air of that room, in the light, in front of everyone. She did not scream about the teeth at her neck. She screamed about being seen. And then Alden Pike was in the air. There was a sound of a chair breaking. There was a roar that came up out of the floorboards and into her feet. Corvin had Pike by the back of the neck and by the belt, and he lifted a grown man over his head like a rolled carpet, and he brought him down across his knee. The crack was wet. Pike hit the rug in 2 directions at once and did not move again. Silence. Just Delia's breath, sobbing, ragged. Her hands scrabbling at the shredded flannel, dragging the pieces across herself, hunching, folding, trying to disappear inside her own arms. No, no, no. He sees all of it. He sees the truth of me. Corvin stood over the body, blood on his hands. His chest heaving, the red bled out of his eyes and the amber came back. He turned around, and Delia shut her eyes and turned her face to the wall, because she knew what came next. She had known what came next since she was 11 years old. She was fluent in what came next, the look, the flicker of disgust, the polite pretense of not having seen. She waited for it, and instead, she heard him go down on his knees. Her eyes came open. He was on the floor, 50 years old, a creature who had just broken a man's spine across his leg without changing his expression. On his knees on the hardwood, in the blood at her feet, and he was not looking at her face. He was looking at her stomach. The soft, plain human middle of her that her hands could not cover, the shame of her entire life. The thing she had wrapped in cotton and denial since middle school. There was no disgust in his face. There was no mockery. There was hunger, and under the hunger, shaking through it, something Delia had no name for. He reached up, cold fingers closed gently around her wrists, and he pulled her forward away from her body. "Please," she sobbed. "Please don't look. I know what it looks like. I know it's ugly." He said the word like it had cut his mouth. "Who taught you such a vile lie?" He leaned forward. His face inches from her skin, and the cold rolled off him and hit the heat of her, and she shook so hard she thought her knees would go. For 4 centuries, Corvin said, "I have walked among people who starve themselves toward the shape of a corpse. Hard, angular, breakable," and he pressed his mouth to the side of her hip. One kiss. Gentle, reverent. On a soft, dimpled place she had hated since she was 13 years old. Delia's fingers dug into the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from going down. "But you," he said. He set it against her skin. "You are soft. You are abundant. You are warmth and life, and the whole world in one body." He looked up, and his eyes were burning. Mine. He laid his cheek against the curve of her belly, the way a man lays his head on an altar, mine to worship. She could not breathe. She was standing in a wrecked library, half naked, with a dead thing on the rug 6 feet away, and a monster on his knees with his face against her stomach. And for the first time in 24 years, nobody was asking her to be smaller then. A sting, her collarbone. Pike's claw had grazed her in the grab, and she had not even felt it, and now a single fat drop of blood swelled up and slid down to her chest, and fell. It landed on the mylar sleeve of the Codex of St. Cyprian, and the book hissed. The blood did not sit on the plastic. It went through it. Delia saw it happen. She saw a drop of her own blood pass through a sealed archival barrier, like the barrier was not there, and sink into cracked 16th century leather. Blue light came up out of the book, not a glow, a pulse, cold and clean and terrible. It threw the shadows of 10,000 books straight up the walls, and the air filled with ozone and copper, and under her feet the floorboards began, very softly, to thrum. Corvin's head came up. He stood, and Delia watched his face and understood, all at once, in a single stroke that went through her like a nail. The one thing she should have understood from the moment he walked into that shop. He was not surprised. Not for 1 second. Not one flicker. He looked at the burning book, then at the blood on her shoulder, and what came into his face was not shock, it was relief. The relief of a man who has been waiting a very long time. "Your blood," he breathed, and Delia stepped back from him, bare, bleeding, shaking, and she did the bravest thing she had ever done in her life, which was to turn her head and look deliberately at his desk, at the papers stacked there. At the folder he had not thought to close, because who would ever read it? Who would ever be standing in this room to read it? Lancashire County Council, a photostat of a transfer document, 1961, and clipped to the corner of it, a small square photograph of a little girl with dark eyes and a bad haircut, standing against a stone wall. Her mother, Delia's mother, at 7 years old, in a stranger's file, in a stranger's house, in a stranger's hands. The room tilted. "You came to the shop for me," she said. Corvin said nothing, not the book, nothing, say it. And there was a terrible long moment in which she could hear the blue light humming, and the rain she could not hear, and her own heart. "The book," Corvin Ashgrove said, "was how I made you come to me." She did not scream. She did not run. Delia Marsh reached out, with her shirt in rags as in her hands slick with her own blood, and she picked up a heavy brass lamp off the corner of the desk. She held it in both fists like a bat. 24 years of making herself small, and it turned out there had been something underneath the whole time. Waiting, folded up like a fist in a coat pocket. "How long?" she said. Her voice did not shake. That was the strangest part. Her hands shook. Her knees shook. Her voice came out level as a table. "How long have you been watching my family?" Corvin looked at her, at the lamp, at the blood, at the woman who should have been on the floor and was not. And something moved across his face that might, in a man capable of it, have been grief. Since before there was has.He here, he said, the book burned blue. The rain fell on a house that made no sound. And Delia Marsh. 24 years old, 220 pounds, archivist, orphan, keeper of a shoebox under a bed, did not lower the lamp. She held it for 11 seconds. She counted them later, the way you count a thing after the fact, when your body has stopped being an emergency and your mind comes back into the room and starts taking notes on what it missed. Corvin Ashgrove stood very still. He could have taken the lamp. Obviously. He could have crossed those 8 feet before her arm finished lifting. He could have taken it out of her hands the way you take a spoon from a toddler. He didn't. He stood there with a dead man on his rug and a book burning blue on his desk, and he let a 24-year-old archivist hold a piece of brass over his head that meant something. And she understood, much later, that this was the first honest thing he ever did for her. Sit down, he said. No, Delia, I said no, ping, pong. 2 words each. The way people talk when they have both stopped pretending. You are bleeding, yeah. I noticed you are also, and here he tilted his head, that infuriating old-world tilt, half-dressed and standing in a room with a corpse. Whose fault is that? Mine, he said. Stopped her because she expected an argument. She had braced for it. She had her feet set for it. And he took the punch and said mine and stood there. The lamp came down, 2 inches, not more. Get me a shirt, she said. I beg your pardon. A shirt, please. I'm not doing this like this. And that was the moment. Right there, not the kneeling. Not the worship, that. Because she said please. And she said it like a woman making a demand, not a woman asking permission. Because she had spent 2 decades folding herself into a smaller shape so nobody would have to look at her. And she was still, right now in this ruined library, aware of every inch of herself, aware of the cold on her stomach, aware of the way her arms wanted to come up and cover, and she did not let them. She stood there, bare, bleeding, and she gave an order. Corvin Ashgrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and unbuttoned his own black shirt and pulled it off his shoulders. And Delia had 1/2 of 1 second to register that his chest was pale and hard and had no hair on it and no scars at all. None, not 1 mark on 450 years, before the shirt came around her and he stepped back. It swallowed her. Sleeves past her fingers, warm, which was wrong, because he was not. It smelled like bergamot and cedar and the inside of a locked chest. She pulled it closed across her chest and gripped it there and hated herself a little for how much better she felt. There, he said, quietly, you are hiding again. Don't. I am only saying, I said don't, and he closed his mouth. Here is what nobody tells you about terror. It doesn't last. Everybody thinks fear is a fire and it burns until the building comes down. It isn't. Fear is a wave, and a wave breaks. And afterward you are standing in 6 inches of cold water on a beach, and the sun is coming up, and you are thinking about breakfast. Delia sat on the arm of a leather chair in a house with no sound, in a dead man's shirt. No, not a dead man. Worse. A man who won't die. And she thought, I left the shop keys in my coat. That was the thought. Genuinely. Not vampires are real. Not I am going to die. She thought about the keys. And then she thought about her cat, who had not been fed since 6 that morning. And then she thought about the fact that she had not eaten since 11. And then, and only then, did she look at the body on the rug, and her mind said, calmly, as if reading a grocery list, that thing tried to eat you. That thing tore your shirt open. And the first thing you felt was embarrassed. She put her face in her hands, and she laughed. It came out wrong. It came out like something breaking. She laughed into her palms in that library, and she could not stop, and it went on far too long, and somewhere in the middle of it, it turned into the other thing. The thing that sounds the same from the outside. Corvin did not touch her. Not say they're there. He did not say it's all right. He did not offer her any of the small lies people offer. He stood at the window with his back to her and let her have it, and when she was finished, and the room was quiet, and her face was a wreck, he said, Are you hungry? And Delia Marsh laughed again, once, wetly. At the Cecling, you're unbelievable. That is not an answer. Yes, she said. I'm starving. I'm so hungry I could eat that rug. The rug is Persian. 1720. Try the kitchen. The kitchen was down a hall she did not remember walking, and it was enormous, and it was full of copper. She sat at a butcher block that was probably older than Massachusetts, and she watched a 450-year-old creature make her a sandwich. He was bad at it. That was what finally cracked her open, not the tenderness, not the worship on his knees. The fact that Corvin Ashgrove, who owned half of Beacon Hill, could not operate a bread knife. He held it like a scalpel. He sawed. He produced a slice of bread with a slope on it like a boat ramp. "You don't eat," she said. "I do not. So who's the food for?" He paused. Half a second. "Nothing, staff," he said. And Delia filed it away in the same place she had filed the photostat of her mother's face, and the smile of the old man in the navy suit, and every other thing in her life that had ever been almost an answer. She ate the terrible sandwich. It was the best food she had ever tasted, and she knew exactly why, and the knowing did not make it less true. Adrenaline is a spice. Nothing else in the world seasons a meal like having survived it, and she ate in front of him. That was the second bravest thing she did that night. Because you have to understand what eating in front of a man meant to Delia Marsh. It meant thinking about her jaw. It meant taking small bites and putting the fork down between them and leaving a third of the plate. Always leaving a third. Because a woman her size finishing a plate was a confession, she ate the whole sandwich. And when she was done, she looked up, and Corvin was watching her with an expression she could not read at all, and she said, "What? Nothing. Say it." "You apologized," he said, "for existing. 9 separate times this evening, say. And you did not apologize once for that." Delia set the plate down. "I'm not doing this," she said. "I'm not doing the look at you, you're a beautiful thing. Not tonight. Not with him bleeding on your floor. He is not bleeding. He has finished, Corvin. I want the file." He went still. "I want the folder on your desk," she said. "I want every piece of paper in this house with my family's name on it. And then I want you to sit down across from me and explain, in complete sentences, why a monster paid for my mother's childhood, and if I refuse, then I walk out that door. You would be dead by dawn. Probably." She stood. Her legs held. She was as surprised as anyone. "But I'd be dead knowing you needed something from me. And you'd be here, alone. With a burning book you can't read, silence." And then Corvin Ashgrove did something that Delia would think about for the rest of her considerable life. He laughed once. Short. A sound like a chair scraping in an empty church. 400 years, he said. "And I have never once been threatened with my own loneliness." He walked past her toward the study. "Come. You will want to sit down for this." She stayed. That is what people always get wrong when they hear this story. They imagine a captive. They imagine a locked door and a girl at a window. There was no locked door. Delia Marsh stayed in that house on Beacon Hill because she negotiated a price, and the price was paid in paper. Every evening at dusk, because his mornings were dusks, Corvin brought her another file. Land deeds, ship manifests, a parish register from Wally, a photograph of a woman in a hat in front of a mill 1908, with the same jaw as Delia's mother, and Delia did with them what she had always done. She sat at that mahogany desk with a green lamp and a loop, and she built a line. It went backward. Her mother. Her mother's mother, who had died in a Manchester hospital in 1979 and never named the father. Back through a woman who kept a boarding house. Back through a laundress. Back through a name in a workhouse ledger, half-eaten by mold. Sowerby, all the way back through poverty and coal and cholera, through 100 women whose entire recorded existence was one line of ink in a book kept by a man who never learned their faces. And it stopped in 1612. The housekeeper's name was Marguerite. She was tall and gray and about 60, and she was the most alive thing in that house. She brought Delia coffee at 4 in the afternoon. Black. 2 sugars. Exactly. Delia never told her how, and never asked how she knew. She brought Barnaby, too. Delia was on the stairs when it happened. Day 3. Marguerite came through the door with a cat carrier, and inside it, screaming his outrage to the heavens, was a 12-pound orange tabby who had been rescued from a parking lot in Somerville and had never forgiven anyone for anything. Delia sat down and put her hands over her face and cried like a child. Not for the cat. For the fact that somebody had gone and gotten the cat. Marguerite waited, patient, holding a carrier full of fury, and then she said, in a voice like a door on a good hinge, "He is not kind, Miss Marsh." Delia looked up. "He is many things. He is generous. He is very old, and that is not the same wise, and I would advise you not to confuse them. What is he? That is his to say. What did he do?" And Marguerite's face changed. Very slightly. "Ask him about the year 1612, she said, and then watch his hands. She asked him on the 4th night. There was a dress by then. That is a story on its own, and it deserves to be told properly. Because it is not about a dress, Marguerite laid it over the velvet chair, deep burgundy. Heavy knit, dense, the kind of fabric that hangs instead of clings. Beside it, undergarments cut for a body like hers, which Delia had not known was a thing that existed and could be made on purpose. Mr. Ashgrove took your measurements while you slept. He what? He is 400 years old, he estimated. He was correct within a quarter inch, which I find distasteful, and you may find whatever you like. Delia stared at the dress. I don't wear dresses, I am aware. They ride up. They everything. Everything shows? Yes, said Marguerite. That is generally the function of a dress, and she left. Delia put it on twice and took it off twice. That is the part nobody films. The two failures. The standing in the bathroom with a good dress puddled around her ankles at 11 at night, with her whole body shaking and her mind going. You look like a sofa. You look like a thing pretending. The third time she left it on. Not because she felt beautiful. She wants that understood. She did not feel beautiful. She felt visible, and those are not remotely the same thing, and one of them is much harder. She walked to the mirror, and there was a woman there, wide, undeniable. The sash sat above her stomach and framed the soft weight of it instead of hiding it. The neckline showed the freckled skin of her chest. Her hips filled the room. She had spent 24 years trying to look like less. And here, finally, on a night when nothing else made sense, she was looking at a woman who took up exactly as much space as she took up. Not more, not less. Just true. She stood there a long time, and then she went downstairs because she had a question, and she was not going to ask it in a sweatshirt. He was by the fire. He turned when she came in and he did not say anything at all, which was, she thought, the only correct response. 1612, Delia said. He looked at the fire. Marguerite, he said, has a great deal to answer for. Tell me, sit down. I'll stand, Delia, Corvin, Ping, Pong. And he told her Lancashire, not the pretty Lancashire. The other one, wet, mean. A place where 40 families lived on the edge of a moor and starved politely. There was a woman there, Aldith Sowerby. She was 31 years old and she was a widow and she kept goats and she would read, which in that county in that year was very nearly a crime by itself. And she had a book. It came to her from her mother, Corvin said, and to her mother from hers. It is not a spell book. That is a modern word, and it is a stupid one. It is a record of what a family knew, and what that family knew over 400 years of knowing it had gotten written in a language that had gone out of the world. The Codex, yes. And you knew her. He said nothing, Corvin. I loved her, he said. The fire popped. I had lived a long time by then. And I had never once met a mortal I could not read within an hour. It took me 3 years, he was smiling. Delia had never seen it. It was awful. She thought I was a Dutchman. What happened? And this is the moment. Delia has told it a dozen times since, and she always says the same thing. She always says, watch his hands, because Corvin Ashgrove, who had broken a man's spine across his knee without a change of expression, put both hands on the mantelpiece and held on. The assizes came north that summer, he said. There was a hysteria. It burned through that county like a fever, and the magistrates took whoever they were given, and every one of them was poor, and most of them were women, and none of them, not one, could have hurt a fly. And Aldith? Aldith was arrested on the 11th of August. On what charge? And he turned around, and his face was the face of a man in a courtroom. On mine, the room was very quiet. Say that again, Delia said. There was a priest hunter, a man named Bardsley. He had been in that country 3 months, and he had found something he was not equipped to understand. He had found me, and I was hunted, and a man in that position considers his options. You gave them her name, I gave them her name. To save yourself, to save myself, he said it flatly. He did not lower his eyes. He did not reach for a single word to stand in front of it. She was hanged in the rain, in front of 200 people who had bought bread from her. The rope was already wet. Were you there? I could not be. It was noon, of course, Delia said. Of course it was noon, and she laughed, and it was a terrible sound, and she put a hand over her mouth to stop it. Say the rest, she said. What rest? There's a rest. There's always a rest. Say it. And Corvin Ashgrove said she had a daughter, 11 years old, who was in the crowd, and then, before Delia could speak, he said the other thing, the thing he had not planned to say, the thing that had been sitting in him for 4 centuries like a stone in a shoe. And I was not alone, he said. In that country, in that year. What? There was a young one with me. I had made him some 70 years before, and he followed me the way a dog follows a wagon. He was there when I gave them her name. He stood in the corner of the room and he watched me do it. Delia went cold. Corvin, he learned it from me, Delia. Every single thing he has done since, he learned in a rented room in Lancashire, watching a man he admired sell a woman to save his own skin, say his name. And Corvin Ashgrove said, "Silas Vane." Delia sat down. She sat down on the arm of the leather chair, and the dress rode up and she did not care, and that too was a first. "So that's what this is," she said. Delia, 400 years, her voice was climbing. She could hear it climbing, and she could not get a hand on it. 400 years of following her daughter's daughter's daughter around the world, paying the bills, keeping them alive, keeping them ignorant. Yes. Because you feel bad? Yes. Because you killed her? Yes. And then I walk into your bookshop? No. No. You walk into mine. You come and find me because my blood turns the pages, and you look at me and you kneel, and you say all of that. She was standing again. She did not remember standing. You say mine to worship, in a room with a dead man in it, and I believed you. I believed you. And what am I, Corvin? You are. What am I? And he did not answer. And she said it for him. I'm a headstone. The fire cracked. That's what I am. I'm 400 years of flowers you keep putting on a grave. You don't love me. You don't even see me. You see her jaw. You see her hands. She was shaking. God. That's why you knew my measurements. Because she was nothing like you. Don't. She was thin as a rail and hard as a nail, and she would have hated you within an hour. Don't you dare comfort me with that. I am not comforting you. He came off the mantelpiece. I am telling you the truth because you have earned it, and because I have not told the truth to another living soul in 414 years, and I find I am extremely poor at it. That's not my problem. No, Corvin said. It is not, and Delia Marsh went out of that room. She got to the door. She got her hand on the frame, and she stopped and turned around and said the thing she had come to say. I am not a tombstone, she said. I am not a debt. And I am not the last chapter of a story that some woman started in a rainstorm 400 years ago. I know, you don't. But you will. She did not speak to him for two. She read the codex, which was no longer damaged, which had healed itself the instant her blood touched it, the leather smoothing over like skin under a scab, the mildew gone. And the pages were blank, completely blank. 411 pages of empty 16th century vellum. And when she put her finger to the paper, the ink came up under it like frost forming on a window, and it faded when she lifted her hand. Latin. Bad Latin, kitchen Latin. Written by a woman who had taught herself. She could read maybe a third of it. She sat in that library 12 hours a day with 3 dictionaries and a legal pad, and she filled 40 pages. And Barnaby sat on the desk and knocked the pens off it. And outside, the November rain went on and on and on. And on the 9th night, the telephone rang. Marguerite brought it on a tray. An actual tray. A cordless handset from about 1998, sitting on silver like a canapé. For you, Miss Marsh? Nobody has this number? No, Marguerite agreed. They do not. Delia picked it up, and a voice says, Good evening. Do you know I have thought about your hands every day since we met? The room went white at the edges, the old man, the navy suit. The $11 book. Who is this? You know who this is. Say your name, a little laugh. Warm. Grandfatherly Silas Vane, he said. And I would like to talk to you about your grandmother. Delia did not hang up. She should have. Every instinct in her body, every hair on her arms, every good and sensible impulse she had ever had said, hang up the phone, Delia. Hang up the phone right now. And she thought about a shoebox under a bed, and she said, I'm listening. May I ask you something first? No, has he told you what he did to Aldith Sowerby? Silence, said Silas Vane. He has, well, that is more than I expected of him. Perhaps he is growing. You were there. The pause on the other end of that line lasted 3 full seconds. He told you that, well, Silas said. And something had gone out of his voice. Then he is a braver man than I have given him credit for. In 400 years of giving him none at all. What do you want? The book, obviously. Let us not waste each other's evening. Then why call me? Because Corvin Ashgrove will never give me the book. And you might. I won't, Miss Marsh, he said gently. I have your grandmother's name. The receiver was slippery in her hand. Her name, Silas said. Her maiden name, the parish where she was married. The name of the man she married. And the reason she gave your mother away. It is 4 pages. I am holding them. You're lying. I am 491 years old, and I have never once had to lie to anyone. It is the great convenience of longevity. A pause. Alice. Her name was Alice and Delia Marsh. standing in a mahogany library in Beacon Hill with a phone against her ear, made a sound that was not a word because there had been a woman in a photograph, in a hat, in front of a mill, and Delia had never had a name for her. Where, she said. Ah, said Silas. Now we are talking where and when. St. Brendan's. In South Boston. It has been deconsecrated for 30 years and nobody goes in it, and nobody comes out. When, come at noon, Silas Vane said. In daylight, bring nothing, bring no one, and Miss Marsh, what, do not tell him? Here is where anyone with sense would have hung up the phone, and they would be right. Obviously, they would right. It is the oldest trap in the world, and it is baited with the oldest bait, and anybody standing outside the room can see the jaws of it. But you have to understand, nobody in this world had ever told Delia Marsh her grandmother's name. She had spent 3 years and $1,100 and 400 hours of her life on a shoebox full of denials. She had written to men in Manchester who did not answer. She had sat in a library basement, enhancing a scan of a scan of a scan for a week to get one word. And here was a voice on a telephone saying, Alice, noon. He'd said, daylight. And Delia thought this is the exact thought. She has never told it to anyone, but she thinks it every time she cannot sleep, Delia thought. He can't touch me in the sun. That was it. That was the whole calculation. 24 years of careful shrinking. 3 years of patient research. A mind that could reconstruct a broken binding from 4 surviving threads. And it came down to a rule she had learned from a movie when she was 9. She left at 10 in the morning. The house was silent. It was always silent. But the silence at 10 in the morning was different. It was the silence of a thing sleeping. She went down the servant's stair in her coat, with the codex left behind on the desk, because she was not a fool, whatever else she was. Marguerite was in the kitchen. She was doing nothing at all, standing at the sink. Not washing anything, she did not turn around. There is a gun, Marguerite said, in the drawer beneath the telephone. Delia stopped. I don't know how to use a gun. No, Marguerite agreed. You would only lose it, silence. Are you going to stop me? I have been in this house 40 years, Miss Marsh, said Marguerite. I have watched him keep 4 generations of your family safe and comfortable and blind. I do not have an opinion about whether you should go. I only have one about whether you should be permitted to, and she turned around and her eyes were red. Go, she said, and come back. I have grown fond of the cat. South Boston at 11:40 in the morning. The sky was that flat November white that gives you nothing. Not sun, not rain, just light everywhere, from no particular direction. St. Brendan stood on a corner where 2 streets met at a bad angle. Granite, sooty. Those boarded from the inside with plywood gone soft, a chain-link fence with a hole in it that had been there so long the wire had rusted into a smooth lip. Delia went through the hole. She had a coat on. Her old coat, the black one, the enormous one. She had put it on that morning without thinking and then stood in the mirror understanding perfectly well what she was doing. The side door was open. Of course it was. Inside, the church had been stripped. No pews, no altar. Just a stone floor and pigeon mess and 40 feet of empty air above her, and light coming down from a rose window that somebody had broken in 3 places. Light. Real light. Falling in 3 dusty columns onto the floor. Delia stood in one of them. Deliberately. And a voice from the dark at the back said, Very good. That is exactly what I would have done. Silas Vane came out of the shadows. A different suit. Gray, this time. His silver hair was combed. He carried a leather folder under one arm, and he walked, unhurried, up the center of the nave. And he did not stop at the edge of the light. Delia watched him come. She watched his polished shoe cross out of shadow into the column of white November daylight. She watched it land. Nothing happened. He kept walking into the light. Through the light. Into the 2nd column and the 3rd, and he came all the way to her and stopped 4 feet away with the sun on his silver hair and his milk-white eyes, and he smiled. Delia's coat was very heavy on her shoulders. Her legs had stopped being hers. Something enormous and cold was climbing up the inside of her spine, hand over hand. You can't, she said. You can't be in the sun. No, Silas agreed pleasantly. I cannot. He held out the leather folder. Alice O'Sorby, born Bolton. 1938. Married in 59 to a man who was not your mother's father, which is the reason your mother was given away. Died in 92. There is a photograph. It is the only one that exists. Delia did not take it. She was looking at his hand in the sunlight, at the skin, which was not burning, which was, if you looked at it very closely, faintly gray. The color of paper that has been in a drawer, What did you do?" She whispered. "Ah," said Silas Vane. Now, he tucked the folder back under his arm. That is the actual conversation. "Come and see." He walked away down the nave toward a door under the old choir loft, and he did not look to see if she was following. Because he knew, and Delia knew he knew, and she followed him anyway, because there is a place past fear, and its name is I Have to See. The door went down, stone steps, a crypt or a boiler room or both. The air came up warm and wrong, and the smell, copper, and something else. Something sweet and sick. There were lights strung along the ceiling on orange extension cord, and at the bottom of that stair, in a room with a stone floor and a drain in the middle of it, there was a cage. Not a cell, not a dungeon, a cage, the kind you buy, the kind that holds a large dog. Welded steel 4 feet by 6 with a padlock, and inside it there was a mattress. And on the mattress there was a woman. Delia's hand went to the wall. The woman was maybe 30. Maybe. It was very hard to say, and it was hard to say because there was so little of her. Her arms were the arms of a bird. Her collarbone stood out of her chest like the frame of a boat. Her hair had come out in patches. There was an ivy stand beside the cage, and a line ran through the bars into the crook of her elbow, and the line was dark. Her eyes were open. She was looking at Delia, and she was completely lucid. There was a person in there. A whole entire person, watching a stranger arrive at the bottom of the stairs. 6 months, Silas said, conversationally. He walked over and rested his hand on the top of the cage, the way a man rests his hand on a mantelpiece. She has been very cooperative. She understands the arrangement. Her name is Nettie. Let her out, Miss Marsh. Let her out of there. You misunderstand what you are looking at, Silas said. You believe you are looking at cruelty. You are looking at economics. And he crouched, right down on his heels. An old man in a gray suit, eye level with the woman in the cage. The serum is 1 part blood to 11 parts binder, and it must be fresh, and it gives me between 4 and 5 hours of daylight. I have used it 11 times in 6 months. Each time she gives me half a liter. Each time she nearly dies. He looked up at Delia. Do you see the arithmetic? You're insane. I am efficient. There is a difference, and the difference is that I am correct. He stood. He brushed his knees. Nettie is a Sowerby, a cousin of yours. 4 generations removed, from a line that went to Liverpool instead of London, which Corvin lost track of in 1890, because he is sentimental and not thorough. Stop talking. Her blood is thin, diluted. It takes half a liter of her to give me an afternoon, and his milk-white eyes came around, and for the first time all day there was something in them that was not politeness. Yours, said Silas Vane, would give me a summer. Delia could not move. She was looking at the woman in the cage. And the woman in the cage was looking back. And the woman in the cage did something then that Delia has never been able to describe without stopping in the middle. She shook her head, very slightly, once. Don't, that was all. A woman who had been drained for half a year, who had every reason on this earth to want Delia in that cage instead of her, who could have said help me or take me instead, or anything at all. She shook her head. Don't. And Delia Marsh. 24 years old, 220 pounds, who had spent her whole life apologizing for the space she occupied, felt something come up out of the floor of her. It was not courage. She wants that clear. It was rage. You'll never get it, she said. I will. You'll never get it, because you're going to sit in this basement waiting for the day I get careless. And I'm not going to get careless. Because I have spent my entire life being careful, you smug, well-dressed. She was crying. She was furious that she was crying. You put a woman in a dog cage, I did, and you stood in the sun and smiled at me. Yes, why? Because you would not have come down here otherwise, said Silas Vane, and I needed you to see. Corvin would have told you I was a monster. Now you have seen precisely what kind. That has value. You may believe me now when I tell you what happens next. He straightened his cuffs. There are 2 ways this ends. In the first, you come to me, willingly, and you live a very long time in a very comfortable room, and I take a pint a month, and Nettie here goes home. And the second? In the second, I take you, and Nettie stays in the cage. Because I will need a reserve, he smiled, and it was warm, and it was grandfatherly. You have 3 days to consider. I am not an impatient man. I've never once had to be, he gestured at the stairs. Go on, it is daylight. You are quite safe. She went up. She got halfway, and she stopped and turned around, and said the only thing she could think of, and it was not clever, and it was not brave. It was just true. I'll come back for her. And in the dark at the bottom of the stairs, the woman in the cage started to cry. Delia walked back to Beacon Hill. 3 miles. In the cold. Because she could not sit still in our car. And her mind was going the whole way. Going the way minds go when they have seen too much, and have not eaten, and are running on nothing but adrenaline and old grief. He was in the sun. He was in the sun, which means the serum works, which means there's a way to do this, which means no. Focus. The girl. The girl is the thing. She's 4 generations off, and she's still enough. Which means the blood doesn't run out. Which means it runs down. Which means every woman in that line for 400 years has been walking around carrying a thing that men like that want, and she stopped on Charles Street with her hand against a lamppost, and she thought. Nobody ever told them. Not one of them. Not the laundress. Not the boarding house woman. Not Alice. In her hat, in front of a mill, not her mother, not her. Somebody had been standing over that family for 400 years, keeping them warm, keeping them fed, and keeping them absolutely and completely in the dark. And Delia Marsh started walking again. Faster. She came through the door at 4 in the afternoon. The house was awake because the sun was going. Corvin was in the foyer. He looked at her. And she watched him take in her coat, her shoes, the smell of that basement on her. His eyes went from amber to something that was not amber, and the temperature in the room dropped so fast that the mirror fogged. "Where?" he said. "St. Brendan's." "You went to him?" "Yes, alone, yes, in daylight, yes," Delia said. "Because you never told me he could walk in it," and Corvin Ashgrove stopped. And she saw it. She saw it land on his face, 1/2 of 1 second, and she had spent 3 years learning to read damage, and she read him like a broken spine. "You knew," she said. "Delia, you knew he had the serum. I knew he was attempting. There is a woman in a cage." It came out of her like something tearing. "There is a woman in a dog cage in a church basement in Southie, and she is a Sowerby, and she has been down there for 6 months, and you knew?" Silence. "Terrible. How long?" Delia said. And Corvin Ashgrove did not lie to her. That is the strange, awful mercy of him, and it is the reason for everything that comes after. Since March, the clock in the hall ticked. "Say the rest," she said. "There is no rest. There is always a rest. There is always a reason. You had a reason in 1612, and you have one now. Say it." And he said it. "If I had gone into that church," Corvin said, "I would have declared war on a man with 300 soldiers and a serum that lets them work in daylight. He would have burned this house. He would have taken you. And I would have lost the one thing I have spent 400 years. He stopped because he heard it. Delia watched him hear it. She watched a 450-year-old creature listen to the exact same sentence he had spoken in a rented room in Lancashire in the summer of 1612, and hear, for the first time, what it actually said. He put his hand out to the wall. "Say it," Delia whispered. "I did the arithmetic," he said. "Say it properly." And Corvin Ashgrove looked at her, and there were 4 centuries in his face, and every one of them was on fire. "I let a woman stay in a cage," he said, "to keep myself safe." The clock ticked. Delia's voice, when it came, was very quiet. It was not a shout. "It never needed to be. That's twice," she said. And she went up the stairs. But that is not the end of the day, because at 8 that evening, with the house dark and Delia sitting on the floor of the bedroom, with her back against the door, and her cat in her lap and a legal pad full of bad Latin, beside her there was a knock. Not Corvin. Corvin did not knock like that. She opened it. Bran Coyle stood in the hall. She had seen him maybe 5 times. Broad, shaved head, a scar down the jaw. He drove the car. He carried things. He had brought her cat. He was human. She had never thought about that before, not once, and she thought about it now. He was holding a cup of coffee. His hands were shaking so hard that it was going over the rim. "Miss Marsh," he said. And his voice broke on the second word. "Miss Marsh, I need to tell you something. And when I'm done, you're going to want him to kill me. And I'm asking you to let him. But not till after. Not till we get her out." Delia stood in the doorway, and she said, very quietly, "Coyle." He looked up. Alice Sowerby married a man named Coyle. And Bran Coyle shook his head. Slowly, "Different Coyle," he said. "There's 4,000 of us in the city, Miss Marsh. Nettie's a Sowerby through her mother's side, not mine. Half-sister," he looked at his shaking hands. "I'm not a Sowerby at all. I'm nothing. I'm just a man with a sister," and Delia sat down on the floor because it meant he had no claim, no blood. No place in this 400-year-old story at all. He was just a man, and he had sold her to save the only person he had. The coffee went over the rim and ran down his knuckles, and Bran Coyle did not seem to notice. Delia looked at his hands. Big hands, working hands. The hands of a man who had carried things his whole life, and had never once been asked to carry the thing he was carrying now. "Come in," she said. "Miss Marsh, you're going to spill that on a rug older than Massachusetts? Come in and sit down." And Bran Coyle came in and sat on the edge of a chair in a bedroom in Beacon Hill, and put his face in his hands and cried the way men of a certain age cry, which is to say, silently, and with total humiliation, and as though something in his chest were being pulled out through his ribs 1 inch. Delia sat on the floor, because it was the only place left, and because she did not want him looking up at her. Barnaby came and sat on the man's foot. Cats do that. Nobody knows why. Start at the beginning, Delia said. It was 6 months. Nettie Coyle worked at a dental office in Quincy. She was 31. She had a boyfriend she was going to leave and a car that didn't start and a cat of her own. And on the 14th of March, she left work at 5:40 and did not come home. Bran got the call 2 days later, a phone number he did not know. A voice like a grandfather, Mr. Coyle. "I want to talk to you about your employer, and what did you do?" Delia said, "What do you think I did?" "Tell me anyway. I went to Corvin. The room got very still. Same night, straight in. Told him everything. Told him where they said she was. Told him what they wanted." Delia's throat closed and he sat there. Bran wiped his face with the flat of his hand. He sat there in that chair by the fire for maybe 2 minutes. Didn't say a word. Just looked at the fire, and then? And then he said, "I am sorry, the clock in the hall. That's it. Delia stopped. She could hear her own voice going up, and she pulled it down by the collar. He said, "Sorry." He said it wasn't the time. Said Vane had 300 and he had 40. Said if we went in there, he'd lose the house and lose the book and lose. Bran stopped. He looked at Delia for a long moment. "He didn't say your name," Bran said, "but he was thinking it. 6 months ago, before you ever walked in that door. He was already thinking it, so here is what a man does. A man with a shaved head and a scar on his jaw and a sister in a cage, he waits. He drives the car. He carries the boxes. He goes home at night to an apartment in Dorchester, and he sits with the lights off because Silas Vane calls. Once a week, on a Thursday, and lets him hear her voice. That's all. 30 seconds. Sometimes she's crying. Sometimes she isn't, which is worse. And every Thursday, Silas asks the same question. Anything you'd like to tell me, Mr. Coyle?" And for 5 months, Bran Coyle said no. 5 months. He wants that on the record. He said it to Delia sitting in that chair with his coffee going cold, and his voice cracked in the middle of it, and he said, 5 months, I gave him nothing. 5 months of hearing her on the phone, and then you came. What did you tell him? That you were in the house, that your blood woke the book. When? The night it happened, and the church? Bran nodded. He called me Wednesday. Said he wanted a meeting. Said he wanted you to come alone, in daylight, and he wanted somebody inside to make sure you did. And I said, he stopped, say it. I said I'd get you there. Delia sat very still on the floor of that bedroom. She had a cat on her knee and a legal pad full of bad Latin beside her, and a man in front of her who had sold her to a monster. And she found this is the strange thing. This is the thing she has never been able to explain to anyone. She found that she was not angry. He showed her to you, she said. What? He showed you, Nettie. Down in the crypt. Bran's jaw went. 2 weeks ago, so he knew, Delia said slowly, that once you saw her, you'd do anything. Yeah, that's why he showed her to me too. And they looked at each other. A 24-year-old archivist and a 40-something driver with a scar on his jaw. 2 people who had been used as levers. Miss Marsh, Bran said, you gotta understand. There's a line in her arm. It's in her all the time. He doesn't take it out. If nobody comes on schedule, if the machine, Bran, she's got maybe 3 weeks. That's what I'm not a doctor. But I looked at her, and I know what a person looks like, and Miss Marsh, I'm telling you. My sister has got 3 weeks. Delia stood up. Barnaby hit the floor and complained about it. Then we don't have 3 weeks, she said. We have 3 days. She went downstairs. Corvin was in the study. He had been in the study since 4 o'clock. He had not moved. There was a chair and a fire, and 450 years, and he was sitting in the middle of all of it with his hands on his knees like a man in a waiting room. Delia put the legal pad on the desk. Get up, she said. He looked at her. I have read 300 pages of your dead woman's book, she said. I know what the binding is. I know what it does. And I know something you don't, which I am going to enjoy for exactly 1 minute before I tell you, Delia. Get up, and Corvin Ashgrove got up. Here's what the Codex of St. Cyprian actually says. It says nothing about spells. Silas Vane wanted a spell, and Corvin had told her from the start that magic of any weight is never a recipe, and both of them were wrong about what the book was, because both of them were men, and both of them were 4 centuries old, and neither one of them had ever bothered to read the second half. The second half is not a grimoire, it is a warning, written by a woman named Aldith Sowerby in the summer of 1612, in bad Latin, in a hand that gets worse as the pages go on. Because she was writing it fast. Because she knew she was running out of days. And what it says is this: the bond is not a gift the creature takes. The bond is a thing the mortal gives. The blood runs one direction, down, from her to him. He drinks and he is anchored, and if she dies, he burns, and there is no version of it, nowhere in 411 pages in which the creature is the one who decides. The mortal is the one who opens the door. The mortal can open it whenever she likes, and the creature cannot say no. Delia said it to him flat. I don't need your permission. He did not answer. 400 years, she said. 400 years of standing over that family, paying the bills, keeping them fed, keeping them ignorant. Every one of those women could have put you on a leash any night she wanted, and not one of them knew. No, because you never told them. No, why? And Corvin Ashgrove said, because I did not want to be forgiven by someone who did not know what she was forgiving. Delia looked at him for a long time. That's a beautiful sentence, she said. It's also a lie. Try again. The fire cracked. Because I was afraid, he said. Of what? Of a woman with her hand on my throat. Well, said Delia Marsh, get used to it. They fought about the plan for 2 hours. Ping, pong, you will not go into that church. I'm the only one who can. He wants you. That's the point, Corvin. That's the entire point. He wants me, and he wants me alive and healthy, because a corpse doesn't make serum. Which means for about 90 seconds, I am the single safest person in that building. And after 90 seconds? After 90 seconds, I stop being alone. Because I will be there. No, Delia said. Because you'll be there and the sun will be up. Silence. Corvin went very still. Delia, sunrise is 6:34, she said. I looked it up. Boston. Saturday. 6:34. You want me to walk into daylight. I want you to walk into daylight in front of 300 soldiers who've been told all their lives that the sun is the one thing that can't be argued with. She let that sit. They're not loyal to him, she said. Bran says they're not. They're loyal to the fact that he can do something they can't. So we're going to take a man who has to drink a woman dry to get 4 hours of afternoon. And we are going to stand him next to a man who doesn't need anything at all, and when they run, then it's just him. An old man in a suit, in a church. At dawn, Corvin looked at the fire. You have thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since Wednesday. And the binding. Tonight, Delia. Tonight, Corvin. And he turned around, and his face was the face of a man being handed a thing he had wanted for 4 centuries, and had never once believed he would be given. And he said, why? And Delia Marsh said the words that this entire story has been walking toward. Understand me, she said. This is not forgiveness. I am not forgiving you. You let a woman hang in the rain to save your own skin, and 400 years later you sat in that chair and did the exact same arithmetic and got the exact same answer. And I do not forgive you, and I may never forgive you. She stepped closer. I need you to stand up in the sun on Saturday morning. That's all this is. I'm not giving you my heart. I'm giving you 3 hours. The binding was done at midnight in the study, with the codex open on the marble stand and Bran Coyle standing by the door because somebody had to be there, and Marguerite had refused to watch. The book knew. That is the only way to say it. The instant Delia's hand went flat on the vellum, the pages turned themselves. 40 at once, 100, and blue came bleeding up out of the paper into the margins and ran along the lines of Latin like water finding a channel. She tilted her head. She had to do it herself. It's in the book. He cannot reach for it. The bond is a thing the mortal gives. Do it, she said. Corvin's mouth was cold on her throat. The fangs went in, and there is no romantic way to describe it, and she is not going to try. It was 2 spikes of white agony riven into the side of her neck, and she screamed, and her back arched, and her hands went into his hair and pulled. And then the pain stopped, and something else came, heat. Blooming out from the wound like a lamp turned on inside her, running down her arms, down her spine, into her fingers, and the last thing she thought before the room went sideways was, this is what warm is. I forgot. He pulled back with her blood on his mouth, and his eyes blown black. He opened his own wrist with his teeth, and he put it to the wound in her throat, and the cold went into her like swallowing a live coal, and Delia Marsh went down on her knees on a Persian rug in Beacon Hill while all 450 years nodded themselves to 24. Blue light ran under the skin of her arms. It ran under her stomach, along the soft, dimpled places she had hated since she was 13 years old. It followed the curve of her the way a river follows a valley, because that is what rivers do, because the shape was never wrong. The shape was only ever the shape the light needed to move through. Bran Coyle turned his face to the wall, and when it was over and Delia was on the floor breathing like a swimmer, Corvin knelt down beside her, and he did not touch her. He said one word, "Thank you," and she said, "Don't." Saturday. 5:40 in the morning. The car sat 2 blocks off Dorchester Street with the engine off, Delia in the back, Bran driving. Corvin in the passenger seat with his hands flat on his knees like a man in church. Nobody talked for 11 minutes. Then Bran said, "Miss Marsh, Bran, if it goes bad in there and there's a choice between her and me, don't. I'm asking you to promise. Bran, I'm not going to, Miss Marsh." And he turned around in the driver's seat and his eyes were red and he was 40-something years old and he had a scar on his dead jaw and he said, "Please." Delia looked at him. And she thought about a woman in a cage shaking her head. "Don't," and she thought, "God, this family, this is what we do. This is all we have ever done. 400 years of us standing in front of each other, saying, 'Take me instead.' I promise," she said, and she has never once regretted it, and it has never once stopped hurting. St. Brendan's at 5:52, the chain link, the hole in the fence, the side door, and this time it was dark. Delia went in first, because that was the plan. Because a woman walking into a church alone at 6 in the morning is a woman keeping an appointment. And a woman keeping an appointment does not get shot at her heels on the stone. 40 feet of black air above her, and the pigeons woke up and went out through the broken rose window in a clap of wings. "Silas," she said. The word went up into the dark and came back. Lights, flashlights. 20 of them. 30. Coming on all around the walls of the nave, held by men and women standing perfectly still in a ring. And none of them made a sound. And none of them breathed. And in the middle of them, Silas Vane came walking up the center of the church in a black overcoat with his silver hair combed. "Miss Marsh," he said warmly, punctual. "Your grandmother was punctual. You've never met my grandmother." "No," he admitted, but it seemed a kind thing to say. Ping. "Pong, where is she? Below? Bring her up, after now, Miss Marsh." "I am the only thing in this building you want," Delia said, "and I have a razor blade in my left hand and my wrist is 4 inches from it. Bring her up," and there was a beat. One beat in a dead church in the dark, and Silas Vane laughed out loud with what sounded like real delight. "Oh, you are a Sowerby," he raised one finger, and behind him, from the door under the choir loft, 2 men brought Nettie Coyle up into the nave on a stretcher. Delia would remember 3 things about that moment for the rest of her very long life. The first was the sound Bran made. He was 40 feet back in the dark by the side door, and he was not supposed to make any sound at all. And what came out of him was not a word. It was the noise a dog makes. The second was that Nettie's eyes found her, immediately, across all that stone, like she had been waiting. And the third was that Nettie shook her head again, still, even now. Even lying on a stretcher with a line in her arm. "Don't there," said Silas. You see, I am not a difficult man, now. "The book, I didn't bring the book. The church went cold, I'm sorry." "I said I didn't bring it," Delia said. "It's in a house you can't enter, in a room you can't find. And the only person alive who can read it is standing in front of you, Miss Marsh," said Silas Vane, and all the warmth went out of him like a light going off in a window. "That was very stupid. Was it? You have no leverage?" "I have the time," Delia said, and she turned her wrist over and looked at her watch, and she said it loud, so it went up into the roof and came back. 6:31. The whole church looked at her. 300 pairs of eyes in the dark, and Silas Vane's milk-white eyes went, for the first time, to the rose window, where the black was going gray. "You cannot," he said. "Watch. He is not here. You came alone. My people have been on this street since, Silas, since midnight, and no one has, Silas," and she pointed at the door. Corvin Ashgrove walked into St. Brendan's church. No coat, black shirt, hands empty. He did not run. He did not roar. He walked up the center of the nave through a ring of 30 flashlights and 300 soldiers, and he did not look at a single one of them. He stopped 10 feet from Silas Vane, and he said, "Hello, Silas," and something happened in the old man's face. something that had nothing to do with the sun, or the book, or the woman on the stretcher. 400 years fell off him. And underneath it there was a young man in the corner of a rented room in Lancashire, watching his maker do a terrible thing, and learning. "You never once said my name like that," Silas said. "No, you never once looked at me at all." "No," said Corvin, "I did not. The sun is in 11 minutes. 3, said Corvin. Her watch is fast. She did it on purpose. And somewhere at the back of the church, Delia Marsh laughed out loud. It went bad in 4 seconds. Because a man like Silas Vane does not stand in a room and wait for the sun. He gives an order. And the order was one word, and the word was take her. And 300 bodies came off the walls at once. And Corvin met them. Delia has never been able to describe this part, and she has stopped trying. She says it was like watching weather. She says a man went into a crowd, and the crowd came apart, and there was a sound in that church like a building being demolished from the inside. And stone chips came off the pillars, and body went 30 feet through the air and hit the choir loft and brought the whole thing down in a roar of dust. She was running down the side aisle. Toward the stretcher. She got there. She got her hands on it, and Nettie Coyle looked up at her with the eyes of a woman who has been down a hole for 6 months, and she whispered, "Bran? He's here." And the woman on the stretcher closed her eyes, and every muscle in her went loose at once. Delia got the wheels turning. The stretcher was heavier than it looked, and the stone floor was broken, and she put her shoulder into it, and she pushed. And she was thinking, in the crackling white noise of her mind, I've got her. 60 feet to the door, 40, don't look back. And she looked back, because that is what people do. And she saw Bran Coyle come out of the dark by the side door with a fire axe in his hands, running the wrong way, toward the fight. Away from his sister, because 2 of them had gotten past Corvin, and they were coming down the aisle at Delia's back, and she had not even known. He got one. That is the truth, and she has never let anyone tell it differently, Bran Coyle. Who drove a car and carried boxes, who had never in his life hit anything, took a fire axe off his shoulder and put it through a thing that had been dead since the truth of Truman administration, and it went down, and it stayed down. And the second one took him through the middle. Delia caught him. She does not remember letting go of the stretcher. She was there, and then she was on her knees on the stone floor with a man's weight in her arms, and her hands were full of something wet. Bran. "Ah," he said, surprised. Like he had bumped a table. "Bran, look at me, did she? She's out. She's at the door. Bran, look at me." And he did, and his eyes went over her shoulder, past her, looking for a stretcher in the dark, and he could not have seen it. There was no light, there was nothing there to see. But he smiled anyway. "Nettie," Bran Coyle said. And that was all. There is a thing that happens to a person in that moment, and nobody who has not been there gets to describe it. Delia knelt on Shameful in a dead church, holding a man who had betrayed her, and who had gotten his sister out, and who was gone. And she did not cry, later, for years. But not then. She put him down. Gently. She closed his eyes with her thumb because somebody had to, and there was nobody else. And then Delia Marsh stood up. The rose window was gray. She looked up, and the gray was going white, and the white was going gold at the edges, and the church emptied. That's all. There was no last stand. There was no loyalty. 300 soldiers of the New England Syndicate saw what was coming through that window, and they went out through the doors, and the storm drains like water going down a pipe, and in 11 seconds the nave of St. Brendan's held 4 people. One of them was dead. One of them was on a stretcher by the door, and 2 of them were standing in the middle of the floor, and the 4th was Silas Vane. He was not running. He stood in the dark by a pillar with his hands folded in front of him and his silver hair combed, and he watched the light climb the window like a man watching a stock ticker. And he was doing arithmetic. He was still doing it. Even then, even with his army gone and his book unbought and his hostage 40 feet from the door, running the numbers, looking for the angle, because he had done nothing else for 491 years, and he did not know how to stop. And he found one. Silas Vane walked out of the shadow of that pillar, straight at Corvin Ashgrove. And he did not stop, and he did not slow, and he hit him with the whole weight of 5 centuries, and he drove him sideways into the light. The first bar of gold came down through the broken rose window and landed on the stone, and Corvin went into it. The hiss was like water on a griddle. Smoke came up off his boot, and then his sleeve, and then his hair, and Corvin Ashgrove made a sound that Delia will hear until the day she dies. It was not a roar. It was a small sound. A sound of surprise. He went down on one knee, and Silas Vane stepped back into the dark and straightened his cuffs and said, "Let us see whether she has forgiven you." No, Delia was moving. Her mind was screaming, and it was screaming in fragments, screaming the way a mind screams when it tries to solve an equation while a man burns. It's a binding. It worked. I felt it. I felt it in my hands, blue light under my skin. I gave it freely. I put my hand on the page, and she stopped, 2 feet from the edge of the sun, because the last page of the Codex of St. Cyprian was written by a woman 414 years ago in bad Latin, in a hand that got worse as the pages went on. And Delia Marsh had translated it 3 a.m. with a legal pad and 3 dictionaries. And she had read it, and she had not understood it. She understood it now. Sanquacis non sufficit. Blood is not enough. It had taken her 20 minutes to get the next line right, because the verb was strange, because it was not a verb you use about magic. It was a verb you use in a church. The bond requires the mortal to be reconciled. He was burning. The skin was going off his forearm in sheets. His hair had caught. He was on both now at the edge of the light, and he was not crawling out. He had put his palms flat on the stone in the sun, and he was holding himself there, and his face was turned up into it, because he had waited 414 years for this. And he had decided, apparently, sometime in the last 2 seconds, that he would take it on the terms it came. Delia had 3 seconds. "She wants you to understand what was in those 3 fascias. There was a woman in the rain in Lancashire, with a wet rope around her neck and an 11-year-old daughter in the crowd. There was a girl in an orphanage who never knew why. There was a woman in a dog cage for 6 months with a line in her arm. There was a man on a stone floor 40 feet behind her, with his eyes closed, who had died for a sister he had sold a stranger to save. And there was every dinner table, every train seat, every dressing room, every doctor's scale, every aunt's kind hand on her wrist. Every one of 24 years of a woman learning to fold herself smaller so the world would not have to look at her, and she thought nobody on this earth would blame me. Nobody. I could stand here for 4 seconds and it would be over. And it would be justice. And every person who ever heard this story would say she was right. And then she thought the other thing. She thought, and I would carry it for the rest of my life, which is now going to be a very long life. I would carry it the way he carried her. And I would build a house around it. And I would put flowers on it every year for 400 years and call it justice. And I am so tired. I am so tired of carrying things. Delia Marsh walked into the sunlight. The gold came down through the broken rose window and hit her full on the face and the hands and the front of her coat. And it did not burn her. And she went to her knees in it beside a burning man. And she took a hold of him. Her arms went around a thing that was on fire. She felt the heat of him go into the meat of her palms, and she did not let go. She turned his face up out of the stone. "Look at me. Delia, go. Look at me." And Corvin Ashgrove opened his eyes, and what was left of his face looked up at her, and Delia Marsh. 24 years old, 220 pounds, archivist, said the words, "I forgive you. The burning did not stop, not because you deserve it," she said. Her voice was breaking. Her hands were on fire. "You don't. You never will. She's dead and Bran's dead, and you sat in a chair and did the arithmetic, and I want you to know I know exactly what I am forgiving." She pulled him into the light. "I forgive you because I will not carry this," Delia said. "Not for 400 years. Not for one more day. I am putting it down," and the fire went out, not slowly, not gently, between one word and the next. The smoke went sideways and up and away through the rose window. The black, cracked skin of his arms drew closed like water running backward bird. And where there had been ruin, there was only a man, kneeling on a stone floor in a wrecked church with the sun on his shoulders. And Corvin Ashgrove began to shake, because he was warm. That is what took him apart. Not the healing. The warmth. 450 years of a body at the temperature of a stone in a cellar. And then, all at once, sunlight in his skin. He put his hands over his face. And a creature who had ruled a city from the dark for 2 centuries sat down in the light and wept like a boy. Silas Vane stood in a strip of shadow 8 inches wide. He had not moved. He was looking at the two of them, and his face was doing something it had not done in 491 years. It had stopped calculating. "It cannot be given," he said. Nobody answered him. "It is a resource," Silas said. "It is a quantity. It is extracted. or it is not extracted. Those are the two states, and Corvin got up. He was whole. He was warm. He crossed the floor, and Silas Vane did not run, because there was nowhere to run and because he had lost interest, all at once, in his own survival. "I watched you," Silas said, "in that room. I was 70 years old and I loved you, and I watched you give her name to a hangman. I know." "I have done nothing since," Silas said. "That you did not teach me, I know." And Silas Vane looked past him, at the woman on her knees in the sun. "Then how," he said, "does she exist?" And Corvin Ashgrove said, "Because nobody taught her." And he took an old man in a black overcoat by the front of it, and he pulled him out into the light. It was not glorious, Delia once that said, because people always want it to be glorious. It was an old man in a good suit, screaming. He came apart in about 9 seconds. The suit went first, then the hands. And at the end there was nothing at the center of that column of gold but a shape, holding itself upright out of pure habit. Out of 491 years of never once having to concede a point. And then a draft came down through the broken window. And Silas Vane went out across the floor of St. Brendan's like ash out of a cold grate. Nobody said anything. There was nothing to say. Nettie Coyle spent 19 days at Mass General. They told her family, and by then Delia was her family, that had been decided in the ambulance, and nobody had discussed it. They told her family that she had lost roughly 40% of her blood volume over an extended period, and that her kidneys had a story to tell, and that she was going to be fine, and that they had never seen anything like it and would very much like to publish. Delia said no. Nettie said no louder. She asked about her brother on the 3rd day. She had been asking since the ambulance, but on the 3rd day she was awake enough to understand the answer. Delia told her the truth. All of it. Sitting in a plastic chair by the bed with her hands folded, that he had sold her out. That he had put a woman in front of Silas Vane to save a sister. That he had gone back for her at the end, and that the last word he said was her name. Nettie Coyle looked at the ceiling for a long time, and she said, "He was always like that," and then she said, "You should have let him." And Delia said, "I know," and they sat there together, 2 women joined by a bloodline 400 years long, and by a man who had shared it with neither of them. And neither of them said another word for an hour, and it was the closest thing to peace either of them had felt in a year. Old Holloway died in February. The way old men die in Boston in February, quietly, and with the heat turned up too high. He had no sons. There had never been any sons. And it turned out he had left the shop and everything in it to the archivist in the back room, along with a note that said, in its entirety, "You have a gift for reading damage. Do not waste it on books." Delia read that note 11 times. Then she went into the back room and took down the shelf of restoration supplies. And she moved her desk. She moved it to the front, by the window, where the light came in off Newbury Street in the afternoon and lay across the floor in a long gold rectangle. She works there now. You can go and see her, if you like. The sign says Sowerby and Marsh, and nobody in Boston knows what the first name means, and she has never once explained it. She stands at the counter, in the window, in the light, in a dark red dress that fits her, and when the bell rings, she looks up and says, "Good afternoon." And people look at her. They do. They still do. There are still the girls in the yoga pants, and the aunts with their kind hands and their retail nonsense, and the doctors with their charts. The world did not change. Delia Marsh changed. Nettie manages the accounts. She has an office in the back, and she is very rude about it, and she has gained 30 pounds, and she does not care, and she keeps a framed photograph on her desk of a man with a shaved head and a scar on his jaw. Marguerite comes on Thursdays. She has opinions about the coffee, and Barnaby, who is 14 now and enormous, sleeps in the window on top of the maps, which ruins them, and Delia has never once moved him. He waits outside, that is the last of it, every evening about 5:45, when the light goes long and orange down Newbury Street. A very tall man in a charcoal coat comes and stands across the road with the sun on his face. He does not come in. He never comes in until she has locked the register and turned the sign and come to the door herself. He stands there in the daylight because he can. Because a woman gave it to him and did not have to. Because he spent 450 years learning what a thing costs, and he has finally, at the very end of it, met something that was given free. And Delia opens the door, and she stands in it. 24 years old, no. 25 now. She had a birthday. There was a cake, and there were 3 people at the table, and she ate 2 slices and did not think about it once. She stands in the doorway of her own shop in the last of the light, and she does not fold her arms across her stomach, and she does not turn her shoulders sideways in the frame, and she does not hurry. She takes up exactly as much room as she takes up, not more, not less, just true, not because a man on his knees told her she was beautiful, because she finally stopped looking at herself through somebody else's eyes. The sun goes down over the Charles. He puts out his hand, and she takes it.